if I were in charge, if I were producing the Under Wraps 40th anniversary edition, I think that I would allow whoever the engineer is to work on it to just wring the best they possibly can out of what is there, and then present a live show in fantastic sound quality just to show you how different it was, how great it was live, how it came to life. And if you're anything like me, it's a possibility that once you see the live performance and how great it is, you might come back to the album with a deeper appreciation of it. Hello, my name is Ian and welcome to my YouTube channel. So last week I did a video in which I speculated on a potential 30th anniversary edition of Jethro Tull's Roots to Branches, potentially coupled with Divinities, the Ian Anderson solo album. The way that I phrased that video in order to fit in so many characters and get people's attention and all that stuff was by saying that the next Jethro Tull book set should be ... And I think that many viewers, and I thank you for watching and commenting. That's how I'm able to continue doing this sort of thing. But I think that many commenters sort of assumed, based on the nature of the title of the video, that I was saying, for some reason, skip Under Wraps, or that Under Wraps should not get the treatment, or whatever. And that's not the case at all. The truth is that I had Under Wraps in mind last week when I made that video about Roots to Branches. And in fact, near the end of the video, which is when I think many people had already clicked off, I mentioned that next year would also be the perfect time to release Under Wraps and Walk into Light as a 40th anniversary package. Because, of course, this year is the 40th anniversary of that record, which came out in 1984. I was never saying skip Under Wraps. In fact, I was recognizing the fact that this is a specialty title. It's a controversial title, and it's one that there's been lots of discussion about changing it, about altering it. And the nature of this discussion involves the idea that the drums, which were programmed by Ian Anderson on an old Linn drum machine, should be replaced on the new remix. And this is an idea that actually comes from Ian himself. It's mentioned in the liner notes of the remaster of Under Wraps, which I have here. He talks about the fact that he dedicates the album to drummer Doane Perry, and says that Doane should have appeared on it. And this is a sentiment that I agree with. I think that Doane should have appeared on this album. And I will talk more about that later when we get more into the back half of the video, which I hope will be more about speculation about what people want. But the bottom line is, I don't feel like you can please everybody. Well, maybe you can, but I have some ideas. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, I thought I'd like to talk about the Under Wraps album itself. My listening copy is actually the original Chrysalis edition, which came out in 1984. And there is some evidence that maybe this version here, this remaster, is actually a remix. And my friend Jocko, who's appeared on the channel a couple of times in conversation with me, this is kind of a breaking news, so to speak, that he and I were discussing at the 11th hour of my plan to record this video. So I won't be talking about this in this video. I won't be talking about the remaster too much because depending on how well this video does, if it's viewed a lot, if it's commented, I think this is a topic that's worth its own video, its own discussion between he and I think I need more time listening to it. So please, as you are watching this, Feel free to subscribe to the channel and comment below and let me know if you're interested in that video about the differences between these two. But for all intents and purposes, we are going to talk about this version because it's the original, and it sounds better, I think. It's definitely less compressed. I think that it de-emphasizes a lot of the worst parts of the album, whereas the remaster does emphasize some of the worst aspects of the drum machine, but that's neither here nor there. But we are going to talk about the CD, which means the CD track listing, and that's another part of the legend of this album. The LP was missing 4 tracks due to time constraints, and this being, I think this was the second Tull album to come to CD. The first was probably Broadsword and the Beast, but this being an early CD, we'll call it. They did take advantage of the longer runtime and include 4 tracks that did not appear on the LP. So that's the canonical version of the album to me, is the one with those 4 tracks. I'm also going to discuss today Walk Into Light, which is an important associated recording, I think, with this album, mostly because the thing that really makes the Under Wraps album to me unique in the Tull canon is that well over half of it is co-written with Peter John Vitesi, the band's keyboardist at the time. Music and lyrics by Anderson Vitesi and lyrics by Anderson. It also features 2 tracks which Martin Barr shares writing credit with Ian Anderson and Peter John Vitesi. So of all the Tull albums, this one is one of the most collaborative. It's even more collaborative than, say, Songs from the Wood or Thick as a Brick, which I would have previously said were maybe the most collaborative Jethro Tull albums. But the reason why Walk Into Light I consider an associated recording, an associated part of the discography, is that about half of this album was also co-written with Peter John Vitesi. And it's interesting that they still have a very different flavor, and I guess we'll get more into detail on that again later. But they belong in the same conversation, I think. And should a box set be done for Under Wraps, I would hope Walk Into Light would be included, and a new mix of it, Atmos mix, whatever, because this is a great album. And more on this later. But first, let's talk about Under Wraps. This would have been Jethro Tull's 3rd album of the 1980s, following in 1980, Broadsword and the Beast in 1982, and 1984, Under Wraps. Now, this, in addition to being, from the writing standpoint, being quite different from what came before, it's also very aesthetically different, because this album is leaning into the electronic elements that were available, the new technologies coming out in 83, 84. And Ian Anderson talks about how Fender, the company responsible for the Stratocaster, the Fender Stratocaster, were getting into digital keyboards at the time. And as kind of a promotional exercise, they gifted the band this wealth of toys to play with. And so Tull were playing in a new sandbox with this album. And the result is it lacks the dynamic contrasts that I've grown to associate with Tull, where you go from really quiet, delicate parts to something very loud and commanding. This is about as far away from Thick as a Brick as you can possibly get, is what I'm saying. It's as far away from Songs from the Wood as you can possibly get. It's not that far away from Broadsword and the Beast, but the main difference with Broadsword and the Beast is that I don't think Vitesi has as much writing credits on that. Also, the Broadsword and the Beast album has a live drummer. So the lineup on this album is Ian Anderson on flute, acoustic guitar, vocals, lyrics, and of course the drum programming. Martin Barr on guitars, various different guitars and potentially mandolins. Dave Pegg on bass. Peter John Vitesi on keyboards. Now, they would get drummer Doan Perry to join them on the tour for this album. And he stayed with the band for some 25 years. And controversially speaking, is my favorite drummer of Jethro Tull. So it's always been kind of a sticking point with fans, and understandably so, that they didn't give Big Boy Doan the chance to play on this album. But I think he joined after the recording of the album, so I don't think it was ever on the table for Doan Perry to record the drums in the first place. I think that it was always conceived as a drum machine album, just like Walk Into Light is. The big thing with the drum machine on this album is that it's monotonous. It has this sound to it that is wearing after a long time. And it also lends this quality to the music, to my ear, where it just kind of stays in the same place, especially the first couple of songs. The drum machine, again, has that monotony to it. And it really hurts the album for me, just the actual sound of it. And it also keeps the songs kind of in the same place for the duration. Even a song I like Radio Free Moscow or Later That Same Evening, they're just the same throughout dynamically, and it doesn't have the trademark tempo changes, not until you get deeper into the album, with songs like Paparazzi, which features a lot of interesting tempo changes and feels more Tull-like. And I think that that's helped by the fact that Martin Barre shares a co-writing credit on Paparazzi. So that one, and to some degree, Nobody's Car, I think, are the most representative of the so-called Jethro Tull sound. It makes things even more interesting to me that Martin Barre has said and gone on record as saying that this is his favorite Jethro Tull album. And when I listen to it, I can kind of understand why, because he does have some wicked sonic contributions, such as the intro to Astronomy, which absolutely rips my face off every time I hear it. So Martin does have a lot of creativity on display here, and I can kind of understand why he likes this album as much as he does. But that's enough about how Martin Barre feels about this album. How do I feel about it? Well, I've kind of indicated that this is not my favorite Jethro Tull album. You may have picked up on that, and that's accurate. It's also not my least favorite. I don't think it's a bad album. I think of it more as a daring experiment, that in many ways it exemplifies what I love about the band, is the willingness to try just about anything. At least up until 1984, they were willing to try to break out of the mold, and they were willing to risk doing something that wouldn't be well received, perhaps because they felt like that was the direction they needed to go in to grow, or perhaps Ian Anderson felt that way. In order to grow, in order to stay contemporary, he had to move in this direction. I think it's also hurt a little bit by the fact that the opening song, Lap of Luxury, as well as the final two songs, Automotive Engineering and especially General Crossing, are the weakest songs on the album. Everything else, from Under Wraps 1 through especially Apogee, which is one of my personal favorites on the album, is pretty good. It's only when it's compared to other Tull material that it crumbles. On its own, it's a pretty unique synth pop album of the era with flute. And how many synth pop albums with flute can you name from the mid-'80s? I'm struggling to name a single other album that's like this. And so I greatly appreciate it on that merit. And I think that it has a number of really compelling songs on it. European Legacy, I think, is a song that could have appeared on any Jethro Tull album of the 80s. It probably would have fit okay with the Broadsword Sessions, for instance. As mentioned before, I really appreciate Later That Same Evening. I like Radio Free Moscow. I like Astronomy. I love Nobody's Car. I think that's definitely within my top 3 songs on the album. I enjoy Heat. Of course, Under Wraps number 2, the acoustic number, which is the only time on the album that we get any reprieve from the onslaught of this electronica take on Jethro Tull. And it's the album's only true classic. I also love Paparazzi. I think it's a fun song. I think it's got quirky lyrics. At times, Ian Anderson even makes me think of Peter Hamill vocally on this track, which is something that I never thought I would say. Perhaps my favorite song on the album is Apogee. I think that this song is perhaps outside of a song like No Step, or even going further back with With You There to Help Me off the Benefit album. I think this is one of the rare examples of a Tull song that I could point to and say is psychedelic to me. It's trippy, and it's even better live. And I do want to talk about the live performances of this era, because that's really where this era shines, in my opinion. But if you hear Apogee live, it comes to life. Martin Barr plays like a man possessed. And it's one of my favorite Jethro Tull songs of the mid-'80s. So as it stands on this album, it doesn't stand out quite as much, but after hearing the live versions and going back to it, it's possibly my favorite song on the album. So that's Under Wraps. It's hard to say where this falls in my personal ranking of the catalog, and at some point I am planning to do a personal ranking of the studio catalog. So that's another thing that if you'd be interested in hearing, let me know in the comments, and feel free to subscribe to the channel to keep up on. But at the moment, I would place it middle high. So it's definitely below the 70s material, and it's definitely below Roots to Branches for me. But I don't hate it. There's a lot here to like. And there's a lot of good songwriting and inventive things sonically going on. So I don't want to rank it too lowly, but yeah, it's high middle or middle high, for me. Now, let's talk a little bit about Walk Into Light. So, this was the first Ian Anderson solo album. Had A been a solo album as intended, it would have been the second. But as it stands, this is the first ever Ian Anderson solo album. And already, I think one thing that makes fans like myself more accepting of this album than Under Wraps is that the fact that it's an Ian Anderson album and not a Jethro Tull album. I'm already more forgiving of the stylistic departures, and my ears are more open. My mind is more open to it already, because it's not a Jethro Tull album. This is an Ian Anderson solo album. It maybe should have been co-credited to Peter John Vitesi, because he co-wrote 5 of the 10 songs on this album. But as it stands, it's a nice little warm, intimate song-based collection that, to my ears, feels more authentically Ian Anderson than the Under Wraps album. And I would also translate that to, I like this better than the Under Wraps album. I think that every song on this is excellent and memorable, and is full of Ian Anderson's witty lyrics and double entendre. Look at a song like User Friendly, which is some sort of biotechnical romance. And this is, you got to remember, this is before the internet. It's before internet dating or chat, or even chat rooms, where people met. And it almost makes me think of the work of David Cronenberg and films like Videodrome, which were kind of about the merging of humanity and technology. And once again, I think Videodrome is from the same year as this, so it perhaps was a topic of that time. But I like the fact that this is a topic that Ian Anderson, the guy who wrote Heavy Horses, is dealing with. It was an epitaph for the death of the old ways and the emergence of technology. And I like that this is, again, kind of playing on some of those same themes, but unlike the Under Wraps album, which is a lot of like Soviet spy, novel influence, Cold War stuff, this album, especially that song User Friendly, maybe not the whole album, but that song User Friendly it ties the subject matter of the lyrics in with the changes in aesthetic. And that's something I really appreciate about this album and makes me love it as a Jethro Tull fan. There's 2 songs on here that Jethro Tull played live, and they came to life on stage. They are Fly By Night and Made in England. I urge you to check out any of the Under Wraps era shows, and I will talk more about those later on. But I would urge you to check out any of those shows in bootleg form on YouTube to hear those tunes, because they really come to life with Doane Perry's drums. And it kind of makes me wish Doane Perry was on this album. However, there's one thing to say about this album, and that's that the drum machine does not annoy me on this. It feels much more subdued and organically part of the album. It doesn't stick out as much. And when I was listening to Under Wraps again for the first time in years, I was thinking that the drum machine got stronger as it went through, or at least the way it was integrated. And I thought, okay, so Ian Anderson's learning the technology. He's getting better at drum programming. Then I realized that the Lynn drum machine appears all over the Broadsword sessions. If you listen to the associated tracks, it's on probably about half of them. And of course, he uses it here to great effect. And it's unobtrusive, and it's not as shrill and overpowering of the music as it is with Under Wraps. And it made me realize that I think that was intentional with Under Wraps. I think that he intended to make a more moody, thoughtful album that kind of draws from the melancholy side of Ian Anderson that I love. I think that he intended that with this, and I think that he intended for the Under Wraps album to be more bright, brash, and dare I say, rock in nature. So I don't think anything here is a mistake. He may say after the fact that, I made a mistake in my decision making, but I think at the time he was very sure of what he was doing. And so with that in mind, I was talking about how 2 songs of this album were played live by Jethro Tull. There's a few others that I wish were performed live. One is Black and White Television, which has all these interesting little tempo changes and twists and turns in the composition. And it's got a texture that I wish I heard more of in music, and that's acoustic guitar and the synthesizers together. His signature strumming style with Vitessi's kind of arpeggiated, the way that he likes to play like straight 16th or 32nd notes. And the 2 things together make a really unique timbre that I wish was explored more, not just in Tull and Ian Anderson's catalog, but just in music in general, because it's very beautiful and not obvious. I also love the song Toad in the Hole. I would love to have seen that performed live for Tull, with Tull. User Friendly, although the ending of the track has that quirky little "I think I love you" computer voice that sounds plucked right out of Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Carnival 9. And I really wish it wasn't there because it kind of spoils something of the mood of that song for me. But as it stands, the song itself, I think, would have come to life on stage. As with Different Germany, which is maybe my favorite song on the album. It's definitely a great one to end on. But like last week, I mentioned that At Last Forever off of Roots to Branches is a song about death. And I believe we have another one here with Endgame. I don't know this for a fact, but that's just my interpretation of the lyrics. So the bottom line here is that this is melancholic. It's finding the beauty in sadness. And to me, although it's a change in aesthetic, and it's very similar in aesthetic to Under Wraps, it's not nearly as abrasive. And it's much warmer and, dare I say, analog sounding. It's more acoustic sounding, which is weird because I doubt very many mics were even used in the making of this album. But I really like this one, and I think it's due for a reappraisal. It's due to be reissued with a new mix too. Not that there's anything wrong with this mix. I just think that an Atmos mix would really open this album up. And I think the perfect time to do that would be an Under Wraps 40th anniversary set, because it's also the 40th anniversary of this album, although it came out a year earlier in 83. That's a technical detail. And I think that it's an important associated recording with the Under Wraps album and needs to be rediscovered. I like it better than Under Wraps, and I would love to hear what you think. You can let me know in the comments section below if you like this album as much as I do. Now, so let's talk about what a potential 40th anniversary edition of Under Wraps could and should include. So there seems to be quite a lot of schools of thought on this whole drum replacement idea. Some folks are saying that they want a drummer to come back in and re-record the Lynn drum machine parts that were used on Under Wraps. My thoughts, as you can probably imagine, are quite complicated on this. For one thing, I searched Google quite a bit, and I was looking for any evidence that Doane Perry was still active, and I can't find much, and this saddens me a lot. I can imagine that, like many drummers who are tall, and I don't mean tall drummers, but tall in terms of stature, I think maybe he developed some sort of health problems and back problems, and I haven't been able to find much in the way of Doane Perry recording credits or live performances following his departure from Tull in 2011, and this concerns me. The reason why is that I don't think the drums in Under Wraps should be replaced. I think that they should be left alone. If they are going to replace them, I think that Doane Perry should be the one to do it. I know that there are plenty capable drummers who could fill that role. One who comes to mind immediately is Pat Mostellato, because he did similar work with King Crimson's The Reconstruction of Light. I think somebody like Gavin Harrison would do a wonderful job filling in. However, Doane Perry had such a mastery of that material in 1984. If you watch the performances of, say, Nobody's Car or Under Wraps Part 1, he makes those songs come to life. Or even the solo material like Fly By Night, he really makes that song sing, and it becomes a better composition. Let's just say Doane can do it. You know, I think he needs to do it the way he would have done it back in 1984. It can't be 100% acoustic drums. I want him using his electronic kit that he used on Nobody's Car and Under Wraps Part 1. I want him using the technology of the time so that it doesn't become anachronistic, which I think would hurt the album in the long run. I think it's like any recording, it's a product of its time. You know, obviously, if he would have used acoustic drums on certain tracks, such as Apogee, I think that he should play acoustic drums on the remix. If Doane can't do it, which I think is probably most likely the unfortunate truth of the matter, is that Doane cannot do it. If Doane cannot do it, another option I thought of, you know that Ziggy Stardust Atmos mix that came out that producer Ken Scott did? I'm not an expert on this sort of thing, even though that music technology is very much my thing. But the technology does exist to copy a performance electronically and sample a sound, like a drum sound, and replace it. And that's exactly what Ken Scott was able to accomplish with the Ziggy Stardust Atmos mix. It fooled me. I did not know the drums had been programmed on that. It sounded like the original performance to me. So in my mind, there's really no reason why they couldn't do the same thing here. Somehow sample Doane Perry's live drum set and replace those tracks. It would be a ton of work. It would probably cost a lot of money. But I think that might actually be the most respectful option for reconstruction. I have heard the attempts of reconstruction on YouTube, and I think they're fascinating. But I think that something where you actually sampled Doane's drum set would be far more to my taste. Let me just say that. It would be more to my taste if they were able to use his actual tones. I have a feeling that, as is typical with Ian Anderson, that he's going to do whatever he wants to do. So when it comes time to re-record the drums, and he has the money, he has the record label support, and he chooses someone else to do it, I'm not going to be annoyed. I'm not going to be angry about it. However, I think that if you are going to do a reconstruction of the album with new drums, that both versions should be presented in Atmos with new mixes. I want a new mix with the original drum machine included. And I think that with modern technology, you could make that thing more palatable. Look at the Broadsword sessions. What Steven Wilson was able to wring out of Jack Frost and the Hooded Crow, a song which very obviously has drum machine, to my ear at least. And Steven Wilson made it sound okay. I can deal with it. So I think that whoever does the mix, it's probably not going to be Wilson. It's probably going to be Bruce Sword. I think they could salvage what's there and do a very faithful Atmos mix of that. So that's one version. And then let's do a version where Ian does what he wants to do, hires who he wants to hire, replaces it, whatever he chooses to do. And let's hear that. I just don't want to see it become like a Star Wars kind of thing where the only version that's available in good quality is the redone version, the redo version. I think that would really hurt the album in the long run. And as somebody who's interested in the history of things, I do want it to be presented as faithfully as possible. My official stance is that I'm against replacement of any kind. And I know that's going to be controversial, but my secondary stance is if it's going to be replaced, it should be Doane. And then my third stance is if it's not Doane, if Ian does whatever he wants to do, I want both versions presented. So that's my final thought. Let me know what you think about that. I hope we're not talking about replacing the drum machine in Walk in Delight, because I think it needs to be there. I don't want to mess with that recording at all. Let's talk about the final component of a potential 40th anniversary edition of Under Wraps, and that's the live material. So it seems to me that when we get live material, it's usually the complete version of a show that was available before in truncated form, or maybe just a few songs here and there was available. In this case, I'm talking about Live at Hammersmith, 1984, which was recorded on September 8th and 9th. It was recorded over 2 nights in 1984. And this would have been within a few days of the release of the album. As it stands, this version of the performance is not my favorite. It's been a while since I've heard it, but I remember the mix wasn't super hot. It had some issues. But the biggest problem is that there's only 2 songs actually from the Under Wraps album included. And they are, of course, Under Wraps #1 and later that same evening. There was quite a bit more material performed from that album at these shows. They were early on in the tour, and the band sounded really great. I know this because the bootlegs of that, which I guess were radio broadcasts, do circulate, and I've heard them. I have access to them. And those shows are just jaw-dropping. In fact, I would insist that the best part of this era of Jethro Tull is the live element. And that is in spite of the fact that Ian Anderson's voice was failing, which is a whole nother can of worms when it comes to talking about this era. But those shows are the proggiest that the band had been since the 1980 A tours, which is another era that I adore. Those era shows are amazing. But this is pretty darn good. And I'm one of those people who loves Peter John Vitesse. I think he is highly undervalued and underrated. And most importantly, he's somebody who could collaborate with Ian Anderson, in my opinion, very successfully. But he is just all over these shows, playing in this like super hot jazz fusion style that him coupled with Doane Perry on drums is kind of like listening to a Zappa show. Doane Perry reminds me a lot of Chad Wackerman at times. And Peter John Vitesse makes me think of any number of the really great keyboardists who played with Frank Zappa at that time, like a Bobby Martin or a Tommy Mars or even Alan Zavad, because it seems like he's drawing from all kinds of different kinds of music, but specifically jazz fusion, and the playing is great. Dave Pegg's bass work was phenomenal. Martin Barre was let off the hook. In my opinion, the whole concept of Martin Barre being the sideman to Jethro Tull and being like a very important member, that comes from the 80s. Because if you watch the shows or listen to the shows from the 70s, where of course Martin is present, he's very much just another part of the band. They're all kind of sharing in the workload. But by the time you get to 1982, which is, I guess, following the A tour, which Martin had said really raised the bar for him in terms of what he was able to play, because the way you get better as a musician is you play with people who are better than you. And specifically Eddie Jobson, he said, raised the bar for him quite a bit. Well, Eddie Jobson's gone, and suddenly Martin is front and center, and almost as important a member of the band as Ian Anderson. And I think that this is something that grew and grew and grew over time, and is particularly well represented by these 1984 shows. Of course, Ian Anderson's voice is disintegrating before our very ears. He ran into some vocal trouble prior to that tour, and the doctors told him to stay home. They said, "You cannot go out," and Ian said, "I'm going out anyway." And the result is that he very nearly lost his ability to speak, I think. And you can hear the decline of his voice. However, the early shows in Europe sound a lot better in that regard than by the time he gets to America, like the Passaic, New Jersey show that's on YouTube, which is fantastic, by the way. But you can really hear the vocal strain happening. But I think those early European shows, such as the Hammersmith show, I think he's in good shape vocally still. And there's the full set. They haven't necessarily dropped anything from the set yet, at least from the Under Wraps album. And it's a really great, musically, instrumentally strong Tull show, and it deserves to have a release in high quality mixed in 5.1 and or Atmos, because and I am working on my ranking of the Tull live performances. I think it would rank near the top for me if they were to put together something like that. And that's another reason why I'm against the idea of replacing the drums in Under Wraps, because I feel like if I were in charge, if I were producing the Under Wraps 40th anniversary edition, I think that I would allow whoever the engineer is to work on it to just wring the best they possibly can out of what is there, and then present a live show in fantastic sound quality just to show you how different it was, how great it was live, how it came to life. And if you're anything like me, it's a possibility that once you see the live performance and how great it is, you might come back to the album with a deeper appreciation of it. So I feel like if I were in charge, that's what I would do. Let me know. What would you do? What do you expect out of an Under Wraps 40th anniversary box set? Let me know in the comments. I personally, I've of course been talking about this for the last however long, but just give me the album remixed, and any outtakes if they exist, which I don't think so, but if they were to exist, that would be great. But I also want Walk Into Light with an Atmos mix and 5.1, and I want a show or two. Just that's all I really need. The drum replacement, I'm not feeling it. But again, you're different. So your ideas, your tastes are going to be different. So let me know what you think. I would love to start a dialogue with you folks about this album. Let me know what you think of this album in general. I think it's a very fascinating part of the band's history, even though it's not necessarily my favorite. But yeah, with that in mind, the next thing I am going to talk about is the Jethro Tull Christmas album. That will wrap up my December of talking about this amazing band. And I also have plans in the near future to rank the studio albums in their entirety, as well as rank the box set live mixes. That's coming also very soon, but I've actually been waiting for the Christmas box to do that because there are 2 concerts on that set. All right, that's it for me for today. Don't forget, like and subscribe and comment. It's been real fun talking to you, and you'll hear from me real soon. Bye-bye. And don't forget, QWERTY is the name of love.